Attunements and distance Reiki. Two very nebulous topics within the practice of Usui Reiki Ryoho, and I wanted to focus on both of those in this week's video. Now, this is coming as a number of questions that have popped up in the Usui Reiki Ryoho support and community group from the members of the group. And so I thought I would combine two questions because I think we can tackle both at the same time here. If we look at both the practice of the attunement, what it is, how it works, and then further, how is it that somebody can benefit from distance healing? Now, before we start, the topics here are obviously they're a bit ambiguous, right? We're talking about something that doesn't have form. So this is my take on it. It's my opinion on it. And I feel pretty confident to say that there is no correct way to look at this, but I think that the approach that I'm giving here will, at least it makes sense to me, and I hope it resonates with you. So first off, in the attunement question, the attunement process, or Reiju, as it's talked about and called in Usui Reiki Ryoho, is a very, very important and very sacred process, right? Often we wonder, well, what is really happening? Because if Reiki is the energy of all things, okay, which is what it is, it's the energy of the universe, it's the energy of the sunlight behind me and the trees and the earth and everything that we have in the universe is the same energy. It's the same foundational energy, right? We could bring it all the way back to the Big Bang where everything was connected with one source of energy. And from that energy came everything that we know in the universe. So we know fundamentally that everything is connected via the same energy of the universe. Now we can call that Reiki, we can call it prana, chi, we can call it Dainichi Norai, the great cosmic Buddha, Christ consciousness, whatever you would like to talk about, right? Whatever you'd like to call it. But what happens then in this attunement process? If we are the energy of all things, then how can somebody attune somebody to Reiki? This is a big question, right? It's a big and important question. And I'm hesitant to go too far into it because the attunement process evolves in stages. There's 3 or perhaps 4 levels of Usui Reiki Ryoho, depending on your teacher. Traditionally, it's taught in 4 levels, but more modern interpretations, and it's the same thing, it's not a problem, of Usui Reiki Ryoho combine 2 of the levels into just 3, right? So now we have 3 levels in Usui Reiki Ryoho, like is what I teach, and in Japan, there's 4 levels, okay? Now, why am I saying that here? I'm saying that because at each one of those levels, there is a reiju, or an attunement, okay? The dualistic thinking around an attunement, that somebody can somehow attune somebody else to Reiki, I think that this is very problematic to the practice because I can't give you something that you already are. We are all Reiki, right? Now, you might believe that I can give you that, and in that regard, the attunement process might help you find something truer about yourself, right? And that, to me, is the beauty of the attunement process. It's a ritual, a sacred ritual, in which we are allowing ourselves to relax and to open up to the flow of universal energy that is always moving through us, by the way. So the only thing keeping us from that flow is the attachment of the mind, and the attachment of the mind to our perceived dualistic environment. Now, obviously, we live in the world of duality, right? So we can't fully escape that. However, within the practice of Reiki, and in particular Usui Reiki Ryoho, it's a practice of working to surrender as much duality or dualistic thinking or mindset or attachment of the mind as possible, okay? So in Usui Reiki Ryoho, we're not reading people, we're not giving chakra analysis, we're not giving, discussions on opening up blockages or anything like that, because each and every single one of those things is a belief of the practitioner and the student. If we have no belief, then there can't be anything blocked, right? There can't be anything that we need to let go of if we can cultivate enough of our practice in the realm of no belief. Remember, the name of Reiki is Shinshin Kaizen Usui Reiki Ryoho. Shinshin Kaizen is very important. It is the mind and body improvement method. So we can't improve the body until we improve the mind first. And improving the mind means letting go of our belief, letting go of our attachment, letting go of the idea that I can somehow see something about somebody else or channel something or talk to animals or do any of the hundreds of things that happen in the wellness space. Those things are all very valid and very real, but there's always one step further, which is to be quiet in the mind and let go of the belief of doing anything, right? So where does that stand in relation to the attunement process? Well, this is my take on it. See, when we are moving through the levels of Reiki, Usui Reiki, by Reiki, I always mean Usui Reiki Ryoho, right? And that's the fundamental practice of Reiki. Anything else that deviates from that may or may not be Reiki, but that is for another topic, right? If we're calling something Reiki, then it should be what was taught by Usui Sensei, in my opinion. Not for any other reason, but because that's what it is, right? The practice of traditional modern Reiki came from Usui Sensei. So that's what we should be practicing when we focus on the idea of Reiki, as opposed to all the other branches and lineages and new iterations and so on, right? Now, but I digress, right? This is a topic I'm very passionate about, of course. So going back to the attunement process in Usui Reiki Ryoho, we have 3 or perhaps 4 opportunities to get attuned to Reiki, right? And each one of those lets us practice a new set of understanding and integrate maybe the symbols in Okudan, for instance, maybe Daikomyo if you get to the master symbol. In the master level, then you can, of course, attune other people and teach Reiki. So these are like a graduation into the self, right? Now, what does that mean? And this is also a question that's come up a lot in the Usui Reiki Ryoho support and community group, which I manage on Facebook. If you're not a member of that, check the description below. I'll leave the direct link to that group right in the top of the description, so you're very welcome to join. Now, in this idea of the graduation of attunements, as we go further and further into the self, what are we doing here? What's the whole point of this? Well, in my opinion, the point is that you are finding a deeper level of stillness in yourself. The question that I'm referring to on the Usui Reiki Ryoho support and community group that I'm referencing here is this discussion around the idea of how can I attune you to something that we all already are? And so I think that that's a little bit off the mark. Now, what I believe the attunement process is an opportunity for the person receiving the reiju or receiving the attunement to come into a deeper connection with their own internal energy, their own daikomyo, their own light inside, right? Their own true self. That's our real self, and that's what we want to return to, right? So how is that facilitated? Well, it's facilitated in those graduated level-by-level experiences, and at each level, you learn more about the practice of Reiki to bring you further into yourself, right? And so this idea then of how is it that I can give something to somebody else that we already are, well, as you graduate up those levels and go deeper into your practice, hopefully your internal environment is becoming more still. So there's another question that's come up in the group of this idea of like, well, if you're already a Reiki practitioner and I'm already Reiki, well, then how can you help me? How can you heal me? How can you do anything to me if we're already the same thing? All of this circles around the idea of holding space for ourselves inside myself, right? So my commitment to Reiki is not a commitment to healing. It's not a commitment to my clients. It's not a commitment to, my courses. It's not a commitment to Usui Sensei or anything else. First and foremost, my practice of Reiki, it has to be committed to the cultivation of an internal environment that is peaceful and calm and quiet to the best of my possible abilities, right? And this is why Reiki is an ongoing daily practice. It's why we have to have it as an ongoing daily practice. And it's further why, from the perspective of Usui Reiki Ryoho, there's only 2 practices in Reiki, right? The daily recitation of the precepts at morning and at evening, and your daily self-healing work or self-practice. There's nothing else to it. There's no sending Reiki to anybody else. There's no sessions with anybody. There's no teaching. There's none of that stuff involved because we can't do any of those things if our internal state is busy, if we have thoughts, if we have all this type of stuff. Now, we always have thoughts. Right? We can't fully quiet down the monkey mind. But when we cultivate that practice more and more, day after day, right, and we turn into the self day after day, year after year, whatever it may be, for however long you've been practicing, and hopefully you do this until you die, then every single day, your internal state becomes that much more quiet, right? And so this question on, well, what can I do to the client? The question on the attunements, all of that stuff comes back to this common denominator of a quiet space inside myself. So I quite often teach it like this in my courses on rootsoflife.org, and when I'm, traveling and teaching Reiki globally. This idea of the attunement will only be as effective, or the healing session on the individual will only be as effective in relation to how quiet I am inside, okay? So let's take a metaphoric example here. Let's say that the person coming in, and I don't want to sound, presumptuous here, so I'll be the client. So let's say when I go see a Reiki practitioner, right? When I go in and I'm seeking out a healing session from another practitioner, then my mind is busy, my day's been stressful, I'm obviously going there for some sort of a reason, for something. I'm going there for help or to relax or whatever it may be, right? And the same for the attunement. I may have just taken the course, I may have just been, my mind might be full of all the information that I've just learned and so on. And so that busyness is what I'm arriving to the attunement or to the healing session with. So all of my mental space and all of my physical space is in many ways very, very busy, right? So if that's the case, and the individual that is giving me the attunement, or the individual that is holding space for me during a Reiki session, if their internal environment is peaceful, if it's quiet, if it's neutral, if there's no judgment, no thoughts, no belief, right? No story, no pretense, no hierarchy, no I'm better because I studied this. And I'm saying all these things because it's all over the place in the holistic world, right? If you can find somebody who is neutral in their practice, then imagine what happens here. So their neutrality is like imagine it's like a glass full of water and sand, okay? So the water and the sand has separated because their vessel, their glass, their container, their body and their mind is still. And so the water becomes clear, right? Now, I'm coming into that environment as if my glass has been shook up, right? So my glass and my experience, my container, my body, my mind, whatever you'd like to call it, is turbid. It's not clear, right? It's swirling around itself, okay? So what do we have here? We have two juxtaposing forces. We have the hopeful calmness and neutrality of the practitioner versus the chaos or the turbidity of the client. So in this case, myself, right? So as we come together, there's a fundamental law of the universe here that takes place. And I think that this is kind of the common thread amongst these three questions that I'm kind of gravitating around here. The attunements, how can it be that I give something to somebody else, and even in healing, okay? So my chaotic environment is meeting an environment that is neutral, okay? Now, the energy within any system will remain the same unless acted on by an outside force, right? This is, again, one of the laws of the universe. And so imagine what happens is that all of my chaotic energy ends up meeting somebody else who is neutral, who is more calm than me, right? So it's as if our two environments merge, they become one. I'm very conscious that this sounds a little bit metaphysical. It's not. We know that this is the case, right? Like, for example, a great way to think about this is a screaming kid who is throwing a temper tantrum or whatever. So their environment is completely chaotic, and they're looking for the stability and the peace of their parents. So when the parent just holds them without any thought or story or direction or advice or whatever, they simply hold space for them. The kid always settles down, right? Because all energy in any system seeks neutrality. Again, a fundamental law of the universe, right? Unless it's acted on by an outside force, the energy in any system, anything on the planet, my body, the earth, right? It doesn't make any difference. The solar system, the entire universe, whatever, all of that energy will eventually become neutral. So I think this is what's happening here in the practice. My chaotic environment, let's say in a healing session, I'm coming in to see a practitioner. So my crazy chaotic environment is meeting the stillness of the practitioner, right? And so those two worlds kind of come together, and that allows me to sink into stillness as well. So it allows my water to become more clear, if that makes sense, right? And that's when we heal. the clarity of our own internal space is the only time that we can heal. We can't heal when we're in fight or flight. We have to heal when we're in the parasympathetic, rest and restore. And rest and restoration via the parasympathetic nervous system has to suggest neutrality and peace, right? I mean, there's no other way that it can be. So we are coming together and we are learning something about ourselves because of the neutrality of the individual practitioner. And it's the same in the Reiju or the attunements. If somebody is sitting in the attunement, then hopefully they can come into, if you're a teacher, hopefully they can come into your presence and be guided by your stability, right? Your peace, your inner space of tranquility. Hopefully they can be guided by your lack of attachment, your lack of belief about the person's trajectory, your lack of, putting symbols all over the place and doing all this metaphysical stuff that is just framed in your mind. Hopefully your mind can be quiet enough that it makes your entire being so quiet that just by proximity, the person sitting in front of you getting the Reiju is able to go into a deeper state of internal peace on their own behalf. And then from that internal peace, they find or understand something truer about themselves, which is the attunement process in Reiki, right? And, this to me was really highlighted in Japan. On many of my visits to Japan, of course, I go and do Reiki circles and Reiki healing, and I study in Japan all the time. And while I'm there, it's interesting how beautiful and simple the attunement process is, right? We sit Reiju all the time. And indeed, in the Shinpuden level of my courses, I teach self-attunement so that you can go into the attunement process for yourself whenever you wish. It's all about finding peace and stability inside the self. It's all about Shin Kaizen, right? So it's the mind and body improvement method. We're trying to improve both by making both of them calm, okay? So this further then builds on the idea of a distance session. Well, what are we doing in distance Reiki? How can we send Reiki to somebody else? How can we sit in a space on Zoom or whatever it might be where we work to the benefit of somebody else? These are huge topics to talk about, and I'm trying to distill it down here just for this video. So I want to focus on this question with still the trajectory of the previous idea. If my internal space can be still and quiet, right, then perhaps we might be able to recognize the meaning of Honjaze Shonei, the distance symbol. We might be able to see that there is no separation between myself and the individual, right? Because we're all connected via the energy of the universe, okay? If we can see that, and if we can recognize that, and if we can hold space in that stillness, then it's just the same as that Reiju example that I'm giving. The person's chaotic environment will hopefully be calmed down and quieted by my hopeful, peaceful environment and my calm mind, right? My practice that is hopefully free of belief and attachment and so on. And big disclaimer here, it's not always free of these things. Rarely, actually, is it. When it's not, we have to work back to stillness. We have to catch ourselves in the world of belief, right? We have to catch ourselves in the world of attachment and the delusions of the mind, and we have to come back to a practice that supersedes all of those things, okay? In that space, there's no separation. So there's no such thing as time and distance, right? So if I can work to cultivate that space, maybe even many different times in one session, because I might go into it and feel it and then be out of it. My mind might come back, my ego comes back, whatever it may be. If we constantly work to keep that quiet, then that means that the individual that is receiving the distance session, their natural state is going to be impacted by our consistency on trying to stay neutral. And that's going to calm down their chaotic state and bring it back to a state of neutrality, right? So this is kind of, again, the thread that binds these topics, the attunements, the distance sessions, even an in-person session. What are we trying to do? Everything that we do in Usui Reiki Roho is about the cultivation of stillness in the mind and then the body. This is something that's very well talked about in Japan. The practice of Reiki is not about healing or attunements or anything else. It's about anshin ritsumei, which means a quiet mind and a peaceful body. It means our real self, right? If we can cultivate that real self, and here's where I was saying that this topic becomes as big as the universe, right? And so I'm not going to cover it in this video. I cover it at length in my classes at rootsoflife.org. It's just too difficult of a topic to get into in one video here. But if we can recognize anshin ritsumei, right? If we can recognize that stillness, then we are literally the entire universe in form, and our form is the entirety of the universe. So there's no separation here, and we are arising into the flow of Daikomyo, the flow of the energy of all things, right? So even if your practice, here's the beauty on this, even if like what I'm saying is like, dude, that's way too out there, I've never experienced any of that, that's fine, but keep it as your goalpost, keep it as your trajectory. So what you might think of is, my mind is so busy in Reiki sessions, I can never quiet it down, I can never work on it, and so on. That might be what you think, right? But I would venture to bet that if you take to heart what I'm saying in this video, and when your mind comes up and you have a story about somebody or a belief or a vision or a download or a channeling or whatever it might be, a voice, whatever it might be, right? Catch yourself in that voice and try to be neutral, or in that experience or that vision or whatever it is you're having. Try to remain neutral. And neutrality there, what that means, at least to me, is the thing can still happen. You can still receive this information. You can still be present for it, but let it pass, right? Always let it pass. We're always working to try to move with the universe, not attach to anything, okay? If we can recognize non-attachment, which is anshin ritsumei, which is shin shin kaizen usui reiki roho, right? If we can recognize that even once, in that one moment lies the entire universe. So you're free, right? That's the beauty of this practice. And so in the Reiki world, we are quite often hearing about things that are the antithesis of this, right? We hear about things that are full of attachment and full of story and full of new courses and new downloads and new symbols and new teachers and new. No, simple. Reiki is a simple process, right? It's a simple process of trying to surrender. That's the only thing we're doing. That's why at the beginning of the video, I was talking about this idea of the precepts and daily self-treatment. That's it. That's all that Reiki is, right? So the big question then would be, well then, why do I pay somebody for an attunement or a healing session? Or why am I paying somebody for a distance session or whatever it might be, right? To cultivate everything that I'm saying here takes daily work. And it takes daily work until you die, right? And the more you learn about Usui Reiki Roho, the more you learn about Mount Kurama. If you take a pilgrimage to Japan, like my 2024 pilgrimage, which is coming up, which I'm going to have more details about soon, but I'm just throwing that out there. So if you take a pilgrimage or you learn from a new teacher, right? If you sink deeper into your practice, if you make a commitment to doing another 21 days or studying all of the lessons again, right? All of the levels again, all of those things are going to help bring you into a space where your mind has a deeper logical understanding of the practice, which is going to facilitate your ability to let go of all of the practice. So why do we pay people like that? Because you should be learning from an expert, right? The term Reiki master is a very, very loaded term. We can't be the master of the energy of the universe. It doesn't make any sense. So what do we do then? What should we be seeking out? You should be seeking out a teacher that is going to help you become a Reiki master by learning how to master your mind and let it be quiet, right? Anshin ritsumei. That's the whole idea of this. And I hope that in this video, that one thread that binds all of those questions, I hope that makes sense. Thanks so much, everybody, for the support of my channel here on YouTube. And like I was saying earlier in the video, if you're not in the Usui Reiki Roho support and community group, take a look at the description below for that link. And if you have any questions on this video, please be sure to drop them below. I'm so grateful for your support of the channel, for your subscriptions. It means a lot to me. So thank you very much. And as always, be well, everybody, and ingosho to all.